Why is the Apple Watch rectangular? A question I find myself starting all my conversations with nowadays. Many competitors' watches are perfectly fine being round, exactly like traditional regular watches. Should Apple make a circular watch as well? Let's start with the pros. One of the main reasons why people have been asking for a round Apple Watch is aesthetics. While the Apple Watch doesn't look bad, it can definitely feel a bit bulky, which is in part because of its actual thickness, but also because of its shape. It is not a mystery that if you take a sharp and squared off shape and make it more round or tapered, it'll feel less bulky. Obviously, the more angles and sides this principle is applied to, and the more the curvature is accentuated, the better this optical illusion works. It's the reason why the old MacBook Pros feel way slimmer than the new ones, despite being almost identical in height. The perception is different from reality. Some people think a round Apple Watch would simply look better, and after making this concept, I cannot say I disagree, to be honest. But after aesthetics, what's left? Design isn't just about making things pretty. The way they look must also be a product of what they are meant to do. Analog watches are pretty much just used to tell the time and look fancy. Some have some kinds of complications, but that's about it. And that's fine. Analog watches are for a completely different market. But in case you want the most useful watch instead of the most premium, you'll obviously need a smartwatch. There's no debate. It's all about priorities really, and smartwatches simply prioritize being useful a lot more. The reason why the Apple Watch is rectangular is that it simply works better for what it needs to do. Displaying text or vertical lists of any kind doesn't work that well if the screen is circular. Obviously, it's not impossible to make it work, but even when it technically works, it's not as good as just having a rectangular UI. Plus, it would require all the developers, including Apple, to redesign all the apps for this completely different screen shape. Technically, yes, they are already doing it every 3 years or so, but not to this extent. It would be incredibly complex to redesign Apple Watch apps, which already try to make the best use possible of the tiny screens they have at their disposal to accommodate for an entirely different shape and aspect ratio. It's definitely not the same as scaling them up for another slightly bigger rectangular display. Developers are already complaining about having to keep all these different versions of their apps updated. Imagine if they also had to make a version that worked in a completely different way. And even if Apple decided that developers could simply go themselves, they'd still have to update all their own first-party apps and watch faces. And while for some of the simpler ones it's easy to imagine how they could be adapted to the new design, what do you do with this? Even for the analog watch faces, the space around the clock is not wasted. They put complications there. They'd either have to get rid of them, making this watch functionally worse, or the entire watch face should become smaller to fit, which looks atrocious. There is also the problem of watch bands. People have been building entire collections of them since the very first model, some being, let's say, a bit expensive. Apple has always made sure that all bands work on all watches, even when they redesigned the lineup with the Series 4 and the Series 7. But there's no way the same bands could work here. But even assuming there is a way to somehow make it all work, it takes time, and Apple's design team is probably too busy making the device of the future that will replace the iPhone, the Apple Glass. And check this video out if you want to see how it could realistically be. Ciao!